Hi everyone and welcome. For today, this is the last final. We have the last panel for this conference. It has been an exciting journey, 72 hours of hacking from our participants. The finale is happening right after this panel. And let's jump right into it. Introducing the challenge. According to the United Nations, there is more than 50% of the world's population that is living in urban areas. And this number is only increasing. It would be around 60% by 2030. So the challenge is that cities account for more than 70% of global carbon emissions and over 60% of resource use. So definitely there is a need for optimizing our adoption of and use of our resources, and that's where smart cities come into the picture, and we'll dive into Africa specifically. For today, I'm joined by our guests and panelists, Tony Lee, Luen, Heidi Solba, and Richard Yeboah. I'm sure I might have pronounced some names incorrectly, but please do introduce yourself and how you connect to the smart cities subject. So we can start with you, Tony.
Hi. Thank you very much for having me here today at this Data for Development conference with my different peers and colleagues here. My name is Tony Lee, and I'm from Mauritius. I'm into the smart cities because I'm essentially from the construction environment, specializing in green buildings and then to smart cities. I'm expert for an advocacy platform called United for Smart and Sustainable Cities, which regroups 14 UN organizations. As a consultant also, I work on some smart cities projects in Mauritius. I think that's what basically, a little bit of my experience about smart cities.
Fantastic. How about you, Heidi Solba?
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm from Stewie World, serving this organization as a president and head of the global network, which means that I'm working with many countries around the world, including Africa. And I do see the emergency, not just in Africa, but also in around the world. But as today's topic is Africa, then try to work on that topic. So in Africa, like in other countries as well, the Stewie World is doing multiple different kind of environmental actions and programs. We are currently in 164 countries, and we are working with our flagship campaign, which is a World Cleanup Day. And talking about the World Cleanup Day, the main meaning is to bring millions of people together, but also different kind of stakeholders and partners in order to raise awareness about the pollution and urge different kind of cross-sectoral cooperation toward waste management, better waste management, or world without any waste as much as possible. And definitely the cities where we do see that currently people are going more and more from urban areas to move to the cities, and their percentage of the population living in the cities. We do see very huge problem if you talk about the proper waste management in those, especially in African countries where the population is growing the fastest in the world. And I think this topic is really relevant. And we, in Let's Do It World, we're also working with United Nations Habitats, but also African Clean Cities Platform. And we try to understand, or inside the Let's Do It World, especially in Africa, how we can actually work together in this way that it will be serving Africa and African population and African cities the most.
Fantastic. How about you, Richard?
Yes, thank you for having me. Richard Yeboah, based in Ghana, but operate on the African continent, and specifically regarding smart cities, two main issues in Ghana involving the circular economy, waste management, transferring fecal organic waste into electricity and really focusing on composting, where linking it to, of course, a city like Ghana growing as a country with a lot of cities, but how do you then solve the waste management issues around it? But also looking at renewable energy, how to link that in the infrastructure. But specifically, I think one of the interesting projects that I'm now involved with is the Smart City Innovation Program funded by GIZ, where we are supporting 31 companies on the African continent within several sectors, smart mobility, housing, and clean tech and fintech, and how and using that as within Kigali as an example of how you could promote smart cities. As many of you all know, that Rwanda and Kigali is really adopting the smart city concept and using that as a basis to become a hub for Africa. So I think in that role that I'm in this call, so besides that, I'm supporting governments and individual MSMEs to really adopt that smart city, even myself investor in smart city concepts on the African continent.
Thank you so much. And actually, just before we delve further into our questions, Tony, could you please maybe define what smart city is and what it means for us? Especially that our audience is not necessarily having a technical background and the term might be new to them.
Yeah, I think the definition of smart city is quite wide and varied. For me, smart city is to use ICT and other means to improve community well-being, lives of people, and increase efficiencies in different operations. I think for me, that's more or less what I can resume smart city. A lot of time we think it's only ICT, but I think there are other means also that we should include in smart. It's not necessarily just technology. Yeah, so I think that's for me. It's about improving lives, improving efficiencies, community well-being, environment. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think actually for us to create those sustainable and efficient urban cities, we need first to understand the current landscape and why we need smart cities in the first place. Could you please share some facts about the situation in Africa? Maybe either you or Heidi could start with that.
Yes, if we talk about the fact, and I already mentioned that it's the fastest growing by population region in the world. Plus, there are a lot of young people. The proportion of the young people are really also the highest in the world. And I think currently the biggest kind of challenge, if you talk about Africa, is a creation of megacities, which is not just Africa problem, but it's a worldwide problem as well. But in Africa, it's growing really fast. And also, if you talk about the numbers, then, for example, if I'm talking about Nigeria, if you talk about Lagos, in 1990, there was a population of 4 million people. Now it's exceeding 15 million people. So it's this kind of growth is really huge and really rapid. And we know from our network that we had really huge kind of catastrophe in Maputo, in the capital of Mozambique, just a few years ago. Where the capital, which is also really growing, but the infrastructure behind of that, it's a really old one, and they have also the slum behind, or actually it's in the city. And during a really huge water or this kind of seasonal raining period, the mountain with the litter, like a huge landfill, started to going down, and actually a lot of people were killed inside the village who was living on the bottom of this landfill. So if you talk about the cities which are growing, the infrastructure is really big topic because it's growing, population is growing, consumption is growing, landfills are growing, and infrastructure is not coming behind all these developments. And we found it really big problem. And also, if you talk about the mega cities, which is a really huge trend in the world, it means that the mega cities and smart cities supposed to be built up not in the way that it is just nice buildings and it's real estate and there are golf clubs and so on. No, it's a question about how it's maintaining their people who are living in there, and also how is managed all the waste management, because I'm talking here because of their environmental topics. So I think smart city is definitely a city who is engaging also communities into decision making, into being part. The city is not for the cars, not for the infrastructure, it's also for the humans who are living there. And so I think this is a situation in Africa. By the way, one more thing. In this kind of mega cities in the worldwide level also are driven mainly, if you talk about the Western countries, are driven by their economical growth. I'm not sure that it's in Africa, because we do see that there are a lot of people who are moving to the mega cities in Africa, who are coming from rural areas because of the poverty. And we know already that 30% of the people in their huge cities are living already in slums, which is not serving healthy being of the people in those mega cities. How is developed, for example, all this kind of medical treatment, all this kind of structure which is needed for their humans, for daily lives, is I think really huge topic as well. So it's interesting where Africa is driving. But it's all this kind of topic of their this kind of smart city is supposed to be looked like a really holistical way.
Fantastic. How about you, Tony? What other facts you could shed to paint the situation in Africa?
Yeah, it's interesting, the landscape in Africa. What I've seen, for me, there are two types of smart cities, what we call smart cities. The ones that first was driven by government and the public sector, and then also one by private sector. I think a lot of smart cities we hear, it's mostly public-private partnerships, but really developed by private sector. So, and I think this is challenge. It's challenge because Africa, as we know, even just for SDGs, you have, they say to reach the Sustainable Development Goals, you need 1.5 trillion yearly, and we only have 0.1 trillion available. So we're missing like 90% of our money, our financial resources. So you can imagine in terms of doing smart cities also what type of issue we find compared to more developed countries in the global north. So the issue comes also with money, but the opportunity that we have in Africa is that we are starting from the base, a bit like technology, so we don't have legacy systems, etc. So we can start right from the start, something more technological or something more like smart, as we call it. Yeah, it's very tricky because smart also, and one of the challenges, smart is also a lot about collaboration and partnerships. And in Africa, as you can imagine, you know, the public sector is very different. Also from, I'm generalizing, I shouldn't do that, from global north. So yeah, and I think there have been lots of projects that started and that sort of, you know, hasn't really like taken off. That's all over the world actually, not just Africa. We've got some example like Masdar in the UAE. We know Masdar city was a big thing, and then it was just now it is what it is. I think in Nairobi also Konza city. I've heard of that a lot of time when I was visiting Nairobi, and this also it's just shaping into different things. So yeah, a bit of my take. It's a bit of some of the challenges, and I'm actually working on this project called Smart Places for African Union, and that's going to start now. We're busy writing, finished assisting or giving our input also from the World Remaining Council, some input into this project. So it's the concept note is firming up, and I think with this, that would be giving impetus to do better. Also in terms of the development of cities in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing this. And actually, indeed, it's quite sad that there are a number of projects, as you said, that just never see the light or like fail to deliver on the promise they gave us. Like you gave some examples. So this begs the question, how can we move from these like futuristic computer-generated images of a smart city where everything is happy, everyone is happy, to actual concrete smart cities. And you mentioned earlier technology. How can it actually enable that concretization from your experience?
Richard, maybe you want to answer this, Richard?
Yeah, so for me, I think one of the parts, of course, I'm sure that we all agree that you have policies, you have the big tech companies, the private sector and all those, but I always like to bring it closer to the realities on the ground. And then you look at a lot of young people with a lot of concepts, ideas using already the technology. I always use my son as an example. He's 3 years, and the way he is used to using smartphones, tablets, and all those things is already a good basis to build upon that. So, but we are talking about inclusiveness. So one of the things that I see is really like if you look at the existing infrastructure that's already there, I see a lot of young people with new ideas building upon that infrastructure. So an example of a company that I'm investing in, they are developing an app whereby they are transforming the existing bricks and mortar pharmacies into digital platforms, so that when you need a medicine or whatsoever from rural areas and all those things, you go to the app, and therefore it could even be delivered to you at your doorstep, where using existing infrastructure and adding on to close the, let's say, the last mile gap. I see that with fintech, where a lot of people that have no access to finances now, with fintech, with the mobile phone now getting suddenly access to finances, and therefore insurances, healthcare services, and all those things, with using the basic digital platforms that is there. And I believe that that is where some of the programs that is coming up with acceleration program, incubation program, really hand-holding these startups to navigate them and assist them through that process. And I see a lot of these businesses coming up. And I think what is most of the time missing at this moment is, okay, how do we facilitate this movement rather than setting up something new? How can we build upon what is already being developed by young Africans, moving them? How can we strengthen them? How can we create an enabling environment to make them to go to the next level of inclusiveness? And then the other side of it, of course, you can have all the technologies in place, but if the users are not equipped to make use of it, then it is also very it will become still futuristic. And I see that really that a lot of governments, even COVID has accelerated, where a lot of people that initially were not going digital are now understanding the need of going digital and even building their capacity and skill set to be able to make all use of these digital concepts. And I believe that that is the next phase of development, really bottom up. And from bottom up, meeting the top down technologies concepts that is already on the market.
Thank you so much. Actually, you mentioned earlier the incubations and the accelerators, and I can see some of the solutions not being a smart city per se, but could have that plug and play approach where they can fit in a bigger strategy. Have you seen any success story like that from your experience? I know you've worked with an accelerator as well, so.
Yeah, so I see many options. Like, for instance, a company that I very much know in Ghana, for instance, that is working in the waste sector. What they are doing is that initially, you know, in Ghana, it's actually compulsory that households have access to sanitation. But many houses, especially from the urban poor communities, don't have these things. So you can do one side, law enforcement, where it is always the debate between those who are renting the house, or the landlords, and those who are living in. But you want to solve the health issue. So one of the businesses that I'm supporting has really now developed a model whereby it is pay as you go. So with digital mobile money, people can buy actually prescription to make use of sanitation, which is in normal sense, you would be like, but it is basic. But bringing this technology make it possible that a lot of communities are now having access to safe sanitation. Whereas in normal places you don't have. So I think so. These are for me examples of clear solutions that is really immediately useful at this moment as we are building and developing new sites of development. How do you make sure that the old sites? And another example that I've seen is that somebody has a model where he's in slums, is willing to rebuild the household, let's say houses, with new technologies and all, in cheaper prefabs, but in such a way that those that are residents there can still stay there, but in a more modern way and more healthier way, but still not relocating them. I think most of the time, sometimes we think, okay, relocating them will be the solution. But you see that actually most of the time, how can you improve it at their level, where you are not doing at ownership of houses, but uses of houses, where most of the poor base of the pyramid people are capable of paying it daily. So some of these are ideas that are coming up, and I see that more and more people are looking at, okay, I'm successful in Kenya, can I use the model and partner with somebody in Uganda or even in Ghana?
That's really amazing. And actually, I see that the economy is moving towards that direction, like not necessarily so much of an ownership, but like how to maximize the use, knowing that the population is only increasing, as Heidi mentioned earlier. And maybe to you, Heidi, actually, in the same context, can you give green tech examples? Because I know you are quite passionate about the subject. So if you could share, that would be very helpful.
Yes, firstly, I want to comment that I think that behind of each success is inclusiveness and collaboration. And I think that it's cross-sectoral because indeed, if we have a lot of different this kind of green innovations and great projects, in the end of the day, it's a question of the context. Do we have enough legislations and support schemes and maintenance also from users, including the government and local municipalities? And I think that is a really crucial question, especially in Africa, but also in worldwide level too, collaboration and inclusiveness. And if you talk about this kind of green technologies, one thing over what we always have been, especially because we are working with the waste, right, and with the environment, and especially with the plastic pollution, then I'm still wondering why and how it's possible that, for example, for the plastic pollution, we have really great circular economy projects in the world. I do know they are costly, but at the same time, they are preventing very huge pollution. If you talk about, for example, deposit systems even, and in my understanding, there is no such yet in Africa, but there are just in 40 countries, in other countries maybe, but it's definitely in Estonia. But it could be a really great project for the circular economy and something which is helping to reduce the waste, but also I believe is also making a lot of green jobs as well. Why not? And in Estonia, it's the deposit system is working on the plastic, on the glass, on aluminum cans, and from all the production, all the importers here, we are able to go to circular economy, circular with more than 90% of all this production yearly. So it's really a huge amount. But of course, there are a lot of different kind of this kind of smaller projects with Africa. What we have seen, cannot talk so much about technology, but I can see community-led projects, educational-led projects, waste management-led projects. And definitely, I think if there is really great examples of projects which is already working in Africa, where is this kind of cross-sectoral cooperation, I'm just underlining this is the most important. then I'm really looking forward to see how it could be escalated across the continent to other regions as well, to other countries as well, because we don't have to invent new bicycle. There is a lot of bicycles in the world. There are a lot of smart people, a lot of young people. Only thing what we are lacking is, listening and trying to find and maybe to work more a bit and try to understand how we can actually work and to bring it in our countries as well into our daily based life. I think this is important.
Fantastic. So you mentioned success as something that we need to see it from a collaboration perspective to make it happen. Otherwise, we might just repeat the cycle, try to repeat also the creation of some bicycles, and we see more failures. Tony, you have probably seen the most smart cities projects. Do you know of any success in the field?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned earlier, I think it's very difficult to do smart cities if you don't have money and we don't have the right framework in place to collaborate. I joined Heidi also in this is very important collaboration because it is quite a systemic thing to do a national project. So, and I think also to come back maybe to answer a little bit of your question before I dive into what you're asking now, the way I see how to get this big major national project live and implemented and done, it's really through collaboration, but it's also from starting from small. So I think this is where maybe a lot of projects, they just want to think big and go big, etc. But for me, what I've seen is that you need to actually start small. And that's why I like, yes, there's incubation, there's acceleration, etc. I'm a mentor and facilitator for Google startups. And I see, the solutions are there. I mean, maybe Richard can back me up here. But then, the solutions, you can't put it in the real life. So how do you do that? I've got this smart parking or something, can I just go to a city and say, hey, just try my thing out? No, we don't have a chance. So this is a bit of a issue of bridging this. And what I've seen also is open data. Open data is a problem. Estonia has got beautiful, expert information exchange, etc. But in a lot of African countries, data is not even fluid between even ministries. And now, can you imagine how private sector gets involved, etc., etc. So to think about smart city projects that have been successful, to answer your question, I don't think I can mention one project, but in terms of city level, but there are quite a lot of solutions that have been implemented citywide. So, for example, in the innovation of mobile money, like the M-Pesa in Kenya, I mean, these are things that started but actually changed lives of many. Like Richard has mentioned, also we are right into mobile health and sanitation, etc. So yeah, there are lots of nice little projects, and what's gone. In some instances, national, even cross borders. And I think this is more, for me, the successes, rather than maybe to say, okay, yeah, there's one city. And for me, my take also, and I'll stop, we always think of cities also, smart cities, like we need to build something new, from the ground up, it's completely new, etc. And I see that even in my own country. Whilst, we can actually, work on the existing infrastructure, because building new infrastructure means it's a lot of money already, putting roads, putting lights, putting just basic things, and this money can be used for an existing infrastructure where roads exist already, etc. So yeah, for me, start small, learn how to work together. And this is what I'm always advocating. I've specialized in collaboration many years ago. For an association called Partnership Brokering, where I realized that actually, like Heidi has said, we got solutions. We've done bicycles before. We need to build a new bicycle. We can't do it. So what's the issue? The issue is we don't know how to work together. And that's the problem. So we can't put a bicycle together because we don't have we can't work together. So I think if we crack this, and obviously it's more complex than this. It's but yeah, that's a bit of my take. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really like your take on this. It reminds me, actually, in this world of entrepreneurship, we say dream big, start small, act now. And I think that's a really nice quote, and we can add to it this element of collaboration. And I think, Heidi, here, maybe you can share with us your experience with mobilizing the civic society, since your organization is quite international. So probably you had to collaborate in every step of the way. And if you could share with us your experience, that would be really great.
Thank you. Yes, we have through the World Cleanup Day, which is our flagship campaign, we have mobilized millions of people just in one single day.
Wow.
But to work for the project, it's a continuous work during the year, because it's a really biggest marketing event or environmental event in one day in the world. So our biggest mobilization was right before the COVID. We have 21.2 million people, 21.2 million people from 180 countries. And this year we had 191 countries and territories participation. Why we are mobilizing so much of people is, beside that we're working daily base with all the projects, is that we want to have a momentum in one day, which is bringing millions together. And if these people are coming together, then this kind of awareness is huge about littering, about the pollution, about the situation in the world. It's mobilizing not just communities, it's mobilizing the young people, it's mobilizing governments, it's mobilizing corporates, communities. And this is really important, because if we want to change anything in the world, then we have to have dispute or common understanding. So World Cleanup Day is creating common understanding, then we have the problem. Plus it's changing the people's behavior, because people who have been part of the World Cleanup Day are changing. In those countries where we were mobilizing a lot of people. For example, in Indonesia, there is the biggest, this kind of engagement have been 9 million. And it's coming from the reports of the country leaders. And it's another talk how we are calculating. But we have made a service right before the World Cleanup Day and after the World Cleanup Day from this kind of mobilization. And we can see the really big change in society. And this is like a proof data that it's actually working. And in those countries where we mobilize many people, even starting from 2 or 3% of the population, we can see the change in governmental policies and the willingness to work on this kind of topics. For example, twice have been mobilization in Slovenia, which a population is 2 million people, not really big country, but however, each 7 person came to the cleanup. And we can say that in European Union today, Ljubljana is segregating and recycling actually, and segregating the waste in amount of 65% of their total waste production. So I think it does have really great this kind of social shift and catalyzing the cross-sectoral cooperation, and this is the most important. However, I'm coming to Africa a little bit. Our biggest mobilizer have been Mozambique with 350,000 people, with their city mayor of Maputo, who have been ambassador of the movement there in Let's Do It Mozambique. And definitely it's catalyzing again this kind of cooperation to seek sustainable solutions for different kind of problems. Either it's working with the youth in schools on the educational projects to bring this kind of educational environmental knowledge into educational system, to curriculums, but also to work on this kind of eco projects, which is bringing community and other stakeholders together especially local municipalities. And this is how Tony already said. I absolutely do agree. To change huge cities, it's really, I cannot imagine how to do it in really urgency. But to start with pilot, to start to grow from grassroots, why not, into the projects which is involving stakeholders and grow from that point on, I think it's really doable. And this is exactly what we are doing. So today, beside the Mozambique, we are also working in educational project in Namibia, which is SEEP, Sustainable Environment Educational Program. It's a pilot, and it does have really huge interest and support from Nairobi Ministry of Education, but also probably it could be also part of the curriculums. We really hope so, but it will be leveraged across in our other Let's Do It Well countries, and this is what we are looking forward to collaborate in this way. Thank you.
Fantastic. Actually, yeah, you mentioned there was a shift in the willingness from the governments you obviously collaborated with, and this maybe brings me to Richard. Is what could be the role of governments actually in bringing this concept to reality, the concept of smart cities?
Well, yes, for me, most important thing is that as we are talking about, there are several levels that government can play a role. One is, of course, policies, making sure that there's an enabling environment and incentivizing parties to work together to really adopt that smart city, but also really about infrastructure and planning. So for me, I think one of the most important thing is a government to take up the vision and adopting it and really taking the lead into that, and then facilitating parties that want to partner with the government to make it happen. You see that in countries where governments really adopt it as one of their leading development directives, you see automatically that the infrastructure is, let's say, all players are really focusing on that to make it happen, and also being facilitated by government to make it happen. I think I recall in decades ago with mobile money. I remember that initially I grew up in the Netherlands, and if you wanted to call a family member in Africa, you had to go, you had to do then a call, and then it goes to a call center, and then somebody had to run to the house, bring the person, and then 30 or an hour later you recall. But then I remember that everybody wanted the households to have landline, and it was not working. But I think the moment that mobile phone came in, also governments making it possible to have this mobile phone infrastructure, penetration went fast. And I believe that with this smart city, that is also something. There should be a will from government to really provide the policies and the infrastructure in place to make it happen for private partners, civil society, and even citizens to embark into this smart city.
Fantastic. Actually, yeah, I think there should be a willingness from the government for sure. And we mentioned earlier the grassroots approach. We mentioned now the government, but of course it won't be possible to happen without the private sector. So I can maybe bring you into the conversation, Tony, because I lived in Mauritius, by the way, for around 2-3 years. And while there, I remember there were a number of pop-up smart cities, like in Beauplan and other places. I'd like to understand the role of the private sector, since most of these were private-led. And given your expertise, you can maybe shed some light onto that. Tony, to you.
Yeah, so I mean, you can hardly call Mauritius smart cities, you know. We're like 1.3 million inhabitants. You know, the country itself is smaller than is like a city, you know, like Paris or London or something. So yeah. It's crazy when we say there's like, you know, 8 or 10 smart cities project in the little Mauritius. So it's more like neighborhood development, if you put it that way. So, but it is interesting to see the the way the government here, as an example, has used the private sector. So I think it's like this because the government has not enough resources to drive these projects with enough money. So what they've done is we created a scheme for private sector to be able to do this on their behalf in a way. So, but by giving them some fiscal incentives, like you don't pay tax for 8 years, and also you don't pay like value-added tax. So lots of fiscal incentives in order for the private sector to invest into these new development. So most of the developers were already landowners and they're already doing property development. Now with this fiscal incentive, we can do more. And we thought it would be like a complete success, but it is very difficult also when you go to an investor, you say, okay, I'm doing this city or I'm doing this real estate development and I need X amount of money, but only in 3-4 years you will see some return. So investors would probably say, I'll just rather invest into a business but makes money next month. So it's quite difficult, and but the private sector is very important because they develop a lot of property. So lots of the property market, real estate developers, and they find also there's some sort of attractiveness or competitive advantage to say that their project is green or smart or etc. So a lot of time it's sometimes it just because we can't afford. If you can imagine you're developing something big, you'd say, okay, I'm going to put these all smart things, but then you haven't actually sold anything yet, and how can you invest into these? And we find that a lot of aspirations are actually turned down when actually in realization. Some of them don't actually even have anything but they said they would have. And that's the tricky part. But private sector and private-public partnership is very important. And I think that's where the role of public sector comes in also. Maybe there's something called blended finance, innovative finance, where the government would put the first amount of money, that's actually more at risk, and then private sector can put the additional money. So lots of different things, and private sector definitely has a role to play because they also are the businesses, are the entrepreneurs, and if there are opportunities like pushing a startup to scale or etc., and they are the one who actually develop the solutions. It's not the government, but develop solutions, it's private sector. So it's very important for private sector to be involved. But when private sector don't get involved we look at real estate property, now we're looking at developing solutions, say for government, for cities. And this is quite tricky because if you don't know that you will have a market, then you can't spend money in R&D to develop it. So this is where it's a bit tricky. And then also maybe a lot of time you don't have the data to be able to develop a solution. I want to, help people in hospitals, but when you don't have access to hospital data or the patients or obviously you want to have access to private things, but there are basic things you don't have access to, then you can't develop a solution. So quite a bit of challenge. Private sector very important in developing smart cities because that's where also all the money is, and that's where entrepreneurship is also. And they are the one also that are behind like real estate development. Yeah, thank you.
So much. Yeah, so you said this about the access to the data, and of course, if there was enough collaboration from all involved parties, that wouldn't have been a problem. Earlier, you mentioned the Smart Places project, and probably you can share with us the progress that's happening there. But my question is more to understand the reality we are facing, and can we ever see a Pan-African collaboration?
Yeah, so definitely collaboration is the way to go. And the Smart Places project, we've done some work before also for SSC about creating like a readiness guidelines for cities, basically to see where you are at, what are your priorities, what can you do. And then also last year, I think we developed like a document that says simple and smart. Because you don't need to be, it can be simple things, but you can start implementing also. And Smart Places, I think the idea is to really support governments in doing smart cities and smart places. And I think that's part of the concept note, and to look at maybe like a couple of projects that can be Pan-African. So this is a bit of the idea. And from this, a lot of advocacy, a lot of knowledge building, capacity building will go on. And yeah, so getting all the different partners together, and mainly like Heidi. I'm sorry I say Heidi, but because Heidi said, to have the support of like the mayor of, that's very important because you can see the difference it makes in a project. So we think the African Union being involved, pushing governments to do things. There have been different things like ICLEI, etc., which is like Association of Mayors. Lots of things happening, but I think having and then COP27 is in Africa next year. So I think we'll see like some momentum there in terms of Pan-African projects. Yeah. Thank you.
Fantastic. And you mentioned Heidi. What's your take on the same question?
Yeah, private sector. Okay.
And actually the Pan-African collaboration as well.
A Pan-African collaboration is really important. It's absolutely crucial. African Union, there are a lot of different kind of networks actually in Africa. And I'm just listening here, Tony, and I was thinking that about these networks, which is with whom we are working even with, which are not for example, related directly for the government, but still do have huge influence in society. For example, we are working with African Olympic Committee, and we found this organization really strategical because of their collaborations, also the influence in societies, because they are working in really cross borders by presenting all Africa, big athletes and so on. So it's just one example, but through this kind of networks, we can also influence a lot, this kind of positive collaborations to nudge maybe a little bit this and that stakeholders and sectors to collaborate and to find the best solutions. And I'm still thinking, and this is the way how we are working also in networking in Africa. We have our leaders group, and if there is interesting projects and people simply are sharing it, or we have conferences or leaders academies or webinars. So we try to find this kind of solutions which is interesting for us or working for the network or for their common aim. But behind of any kind of civic movement, we do see that it's really important empowerment, and empowerment especially from the governmental side, because if there is lack of infrastructure, if there is, for example, one day you are working and to sharing experience and bringing people into actions, but there is lacking on infrastructure or this kind of legislations or everything which is helping to maintenance this behind, then it's a really big mistake. That's why we have to work in holistical way, as I already said, and to change it really fast is really hard. And I think it's really hard. That's why it's better to have this kind of great examples as great pilots and to escalate it.
Fantastic. And you mentioned great examples. So, Richard, do you have actually any great example of Pan-African collaboration? Or?
Well, I think recently, maybe many have seen it, the visit of the president of South Africa to Ghana, tidying up the relationship, but also Ghana and Rwanda, aiming at on government side partnering and working more together, as well as promoting private sectors to work together, and also in education, where you see that governments are looking at, okay, where the best practices and what a country is good at, how can we work together within the various countries to strengthen that from that economical point of view and also technological point of view. So I see that really for Ghana and Rwanda, I'm seeing it. Of course, Ghana has already long-time relationship with Nigeria, building that, but I think more and more that initially where African countries were thinking in blocks, now looking at it as a continent, in where, okay, as a continent, where can we strengthen each other to really promote that inclusive growth, where you will want everybody to join, and where it is not only the rich and famous that are benefiting from it, but also really taking the grassroots about it. And my colleague speakers, I agree with them that at the end of it, it must have a win-win for everybody. And I think one of the things that we have been saying in decades is that, yes, it must be win-win, but you don't see it back in policies, you don't see it back in partnership, you don't see it back in actions. And I think really the past few years, I feel like since COVID hit Africa, and where hit the world, actually, where everybody was looking at its own personal interests, you could see that Africans also came in reality that, listen, we need to also step up our game. We need to make sure that our scientists, our youth, our education systems, our infrastructure is very working together to make solutions that will be in favor of ourselves. We'll make sure that we are also positioning ourselves to solve our challenges that we are facing. And I think there's a good movement for also private sector, civil society, politics, government to all come together to move this smart city concept and ideology to a next level.
Thank you so much. And actually, this is a great way to wrap our panel, because indeed we are having the final starting in 9 minutes. So I urge the audience to stay tuned, stay actually in live, and to support the teams that are going to be presenting soon. And I wish you all the best. Thank you to our panelists for sharing their expertise with us. It was really great to learn about the future of smart cities in Africa. Have a great weekend.